right around, I'd say 2021, we had a goal. Could we move the youth vote 10 points over 10 years? And we
And it
won.
was literally you sat down and put that numerical together.
Yeah, like, can we move it 10 points over 10 years? Ish, approximate.
Yeah.
Because our whole hypothesis was, and we did this alongside President Trump and his great team, was that this demographic is disproportionately to the Democrat side. We believe Democrats were taking them for granted. We think that your side had no message whatsoever and an ideological monopoly. We saw some of the fault lines there. And to President Trump's credit, he also harmonized with the strategy by going on podcasting and using TikTok. But yeah, I mean, we did it in 4 years, not 10, large in part thanks to you guys.
And we'll get to
What's interesting here is he's highlighting that Republicans saw that problem, and they might be good with the marketing of it, but we have to analyze if the policies of Republicans, if that really actually does help younger people. So, for example, with the big, beautiful bill is you have a lot of people that are going to be thrown off their health care, whereas Republicans want to cut Social Security. Who is going to be likely to have pressure on them to step up to help their family members? It's going to be young people, right? When we cut the safety net, that puts more pressure on young people, especially those that don't have very wealthy backgrounds. Their families don't have a lot of money. They're going to be having to spend money that they would have been able to invest on their parents, right? And so Charlie Kirk brings up maybe the Republicans, maybe people maybe groups like Turning Point USA were good with talking about the problems that young people had, but I'm not convinced that their policies are actually better.
I got married and have kids, become more conservative. But no, look, just one of the things we saw in the last couple of years that the Democrats completely ignored, and your side was basically not acknowledging it was happening, was the crisis that young people were experiencing.
Right.
That, I mean, it's the first time in America's history that a 30-year-old is going to have it worse off than their parents.
Right.
It's a breakdown of the social compact.
That's right.
They are the most alcohol addicted, most drug addicted, most suicidal, most depressed, most medicated generation in history.
Right.
And the message that was largely being fed to a lot of young people was lower your expectations. You're not going to have the same American dream that your parents would have. Mm-hmm. And we saw this as an opportunity, especially with young men. And again, this got ridiculed a lot.
The most alcohol addicted. It's highlighting these mental health struggles, right? And so it's giving off the impression that the Trump administration cares about that and that they are trying to do a lot about that. But just the opposite. Just last week, for example, he had this interview with Gavin Newsom back at the beginning of 2025. But here we are in September, and you have concerns of Trump and his administration making cuts to mental health programs. So I think that Charlie Kirk and Trump, they're good at marketing, right? They're good at convincing people that they're going to help them with their problems, but I'm not convinced that the policies actually add up to that. I almost would argue that Democrats are in some ways the opposite. They have a lot of policies that are going to help people, but they struggle to communicate that well. They come off as maybe elitist, and they have a hard time basically convincing the public of how their policies are going to be beneficial for them. And again, with that idea that young men were struggling so much, and that's part of the reason why Trump won, I don't dispute that young men were struggling. But the thing that's interesting there is Biden, for example, was a very pro-labor president. Young people have done better as they have joined unions, right? Unions push for better wages across the board for everyone. And so this idea of Trump being the answer to that, it just seems like a stretch, but definitely Charlie Kirk was talented with marketing. Trump's talented with marketing.
They're half of the population and necessary for any society and civilization to succeed, which is to have both strong men and strong women.
Yeah.
And we went about that in a very unique and creative way. And again, the president became a cultural phenomenon, right, where no matter what you threw at this guy, he rose above it. And you would even have to give him credit. I mean, basically 700 years in federal prison. Yeah. States tried to kick him off the ballot. I know you spoke out against it, but California did have a faction that tried to kick him off the ballot, right?
That's right.
And despite all of that, of course, being shot, and that was kind of the crescendo of all of it, he kind of became this figure of an American comeback story.
Yeah.
So
Charlie talks about Trump being a cultural icon, right? Just wanted to point out, so was McCarthy. Right, so McCarthy, he was a symbol of just like reckless accusations, division, destruction. So being an icon doesn't necessarily mean that you're good for the country, even though, like, yes, Trump was very popular with a specific segment of the population. But Trump will potentially be viewed by historians as just like basically an exaggerated, more powerful version of a McCarthy type figure. Right. So sometimes these cultural icons like McCarthy, like they're opportunists. We need to understand, of course, Charlie Kirk's going to speak positive of Trump because his career is tied to Trump. A lot of his power had to do with his proximity to Donald Trump Jr. And so, again, just that idea when it comes to like cultural icon, like McCarthy, he ruined a lot of lives when it came to teachers, actors, federal employees that were blacklisted. He weakened people's trust in democratic institutions. Okay, and then like there's other types of cultural icons. Like Mussolini was a cultural icon in his country. Okay, and so like Richard Nixon, he was viewed as a cultural icon that represented the silent majority, but he was extremely corrupt. And so that's, I mean, just the idea of like someone being a cultural icon, that's not necessarily an indicator of their, that's not really an indicator that they're like good for the country.